Yep.
Okay, here we go. This will be the Audits and Government Efficiency Committee meeting for Tuesday, September 13th. Council member Zine, Chair. My colleague Mitch Englander, Councilor Mitch Englander, and is Mr. Koretz going to be here? Anybody know? Going once, going twice? We don't know. All right, we've got 4 items on the agenda. It is now 10 after 2. We're going to begin with number 1, please, Clerk.
Item number 1, City Controller Report relative to follow-up correspondence to the review of the Supply Management System's controls over purchasing authority.
All right.
Good afternoon. My name is Siri Kulsa. I'm from the Controller's Office. I think this item has been heard by your committee, but if you like, I can give a brief overview of what the audit was.
Please do.
This audit was issued in February of 2010. The objective was to look at the controls over the users of the supply management system. SMS is really the principal electronic information system that is used by the city to manage the commodity procurement processes. It's really a distributed system. It is maintained by ITA and GSD, but the primary data entry happens at the department level. To control a risk of problems with purchasing, typically you hear about segregation of duties. What SMS allows for through a user profile is to segregate duties of the primary functions of requesting or initiating an order, approving that order, authorizing the budget or the payment of that order, and actually receiving the goods. We looked at the user profiles there are approximately at least 3,000 SMS authorized users at the time that we did our review, to really look at how those user profiles were set up and to see if there were any incompatible functions. We also looked at user rights. And the basic finding was that about 300 city employees across many departments actually had what we would consider inappropriate rights to basically do more than
access.
They're not only access to order, but they're also authorized to receive and approve, which really defeats the purpose of the segregation of duties as defined by the system. We did further field work at 7 departments and bureaus and found that in many cases the actual functions were segregated and there was evidence on paper copies of things, but really it was the same person that was entering all the 3 or 4 levels of information within the system. So we had an overall recommendation that we really wanted to have department personnel utilize the system as it was intended to enable that more automatic segregation of duties. We also found quite a high number of terminated employees that still had SMS user access, and about 50 that had at least 2 or more SMS user IDs. And the problem, again, with these issues is to try and, if there was a problem, to identify who was creating that problem. We did find in at least 2 departments for an extended period of time that employees were placing orders using another person's SMS ID, in that someone who had authorized access had been terminated or had left that job, but rather than training someone else and getting them authorized as a separate user ID, they were simply using that prior person's password. Again, this is just a control issue that really defeats the whole purpose of access controls. We made several recommendations that were accepted by GSD and ITA, and as of our last status, most of them are in progress. There was some delay concerned with the effort that we would take to implement given the FMS and SMS integration project.
Okay. So in the correspondence in January stated that some recommendations should be completed by the departments. Are there any that the departments are resistant to making their modifications? Or are they cooperative in making those changes?
John Shribgoda from the Department of General Services. We wholly agree with the audit and the findings. We thank the controller. This helps strengthen our system. They did find several deficiencies that we were aware of, and agree with the need to move forward with these implementations.
Now, what do we do about employees who leave city employment for one reason or other? How do we remove their access to buildings? How do we remove their access to computers? How do we remove their access to ordering purchasing items?
Well, I can address the SMS system, which would be the ordering point for the city. Our plan is to interface with Pacer, and as employees are purged from the Pacer system, the payroll system, we will also purge from the SMS system.
Simultaneously?
Yes. There may be a slight delay because the payroll system runs, I believe, every 2 weeks.
It's 2 weeks, always 2 weeks behind,
Yes,
so there'll be at least a 2-week gap there. 'Cause
I believe so, and that's analysis that we still need to complete. We did do an initial cleanup after the controller brought these findings to our attention. And it was a manual reconciliation between Pacer and SMS, and our plan, we were moving in the direction of interfacing the two systems, and had to suspend that effort because of the FMS system.
Okay, and why is the department not reported back relative to the issues of spend management and off-peak hours deliveries?
Actually, that was a request made by Councilman Parks, and we did report back to the Budget and Finance Committee and to ITGA in August of 2010.
Okay. So the controller's audit brought forward some issues that had to be corrected.
Right, but I do want to clarify, the controller's audit did not address spend management or the off-peak deliveries. That was a piggyback, for lack of better words.
Because what we're trying to do is run a nice, smooth, efficient operation.
Understand, yes.
Paid for by the taxpayers.
Right.
Okay, so Mitch Englander, council member?
Thank you, Mr. Zine. Just a couple questions on the, first of all, thank you for bringing all this information forward. This is something that I think we do need to pay close attention to, particularly on what items are being purchased every single day by these 3,000 employees. And much of it, I'm sure, is needed supplies, and maybe some other things. Have we done any spot checks since the audit, just random spot checks on where we're at in terms of those employees who have either terminated, transferred, or left the city for whatever reason, or their actual department, on, because you said you'd found earlier that about 50 that were on SMS before left the city, but they were still active in ordering items because they were, the new employees or other employees were either lazy, didn't go through the training, or didn't have the proper new SMS access assigned to them, and so they were utilizing the old ones.
There was a great deal of work that was gone into this audit, and unfortunately did need to be put aside because of the FMS system. We did do an initial scrub of SMS, comparing it to the Pacer system, and we removed between 200 and 300 employee IDs out of the system. So we were working in that direction. There was a lot of progress made in having SMS talk with Pacer. But again, we have not been able to resume that activity because of our efforts with FMS.
So what I'm trying to figure out, though, is, so if it was an initial scrub, it very well could be that, when was that initial scrub done?
2010, and I couldn't tell you the
So we've since gone through early retirement?
Yes. Oh,
and a lot of there's been a lot of change.
I will be the first to tell you that it needs to be done again, but we had some other commitments we needed to live up to. I'll be the very first to tell you, we're not 100%, and it is very important that we turn our attention back to it.
Okay, I'll come back to that. So in that, though, you mentioned earlier, and I'm just trying to understand this, the purchases, certain folks or all folks who make these purchases on SMS have the access to approve those purchases, and the approval to approve their own purchase. There's not different levels where one employee would log into the system, put in their procurement request, and then somebody else or supervisor had to sign off on? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
There is a separation of duties within SMS. There are user roles where we have an individual who would be a requester, another individual who would be the what we call the chief accountant employee, who would give the financial approval, another individual who would apply the supervisory approval for the purchase. That's on the request side, and on the receiving side, there would be another individual who would be responsible for receiving the system. That's the way the system is designed, but as the controller pointed out, there are some people who are taking some liberties with their user roles. and that's what we need to correct.
That's what I was trying, yeah, so taking liberties with their user rules, meaning that they have all 3 access points, is that what you mean?
Yes.
So one person is signing off on their own?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a
That's
problem.
true. And we need the department's help to monitor that, because that's not something that we would be able to see necessarily. We would also need the departments to implement procedures on their side, the using departments, to monitor and spot check as well. And I believe that was also one of the controller's findings.
Now, so are we holding any supervisors, managers, or AGMs, GMs, anybody accountable to that? So is my question, if we don't have policies in place, and it sounds like we're missing a major policy here, that if somebody has access to do all 2 or 3 of those items, that's a major red flag.
Agreed, and again, that was one of the controller's findings, and when we do support that finding, that's where we need the general managers to...
I get that, but the controller, that's the beauty of having a controller. They find these issues, and that's their responsibility, and we have a great controller, and hopefully our next controller will be terrific as well in finding these flaws. But with that, and there's no perfect system, but once those are identified, it sounds like there is a breach, and there's a hole in the policy that we don't have because the controller doesn't set policies. The council does, or commissions, or the mayor by executive order. Once we've identified an issue of policy, that's my concern, that we now have this identified issue, but we have no policy to address it, then we can't hold anybody accountable if we don't have the policy.
Understood. And at the time the audit was released, it was discussed with the mayor's office. When we do finalize our fixes, we do plan on sending out a notice to all general managers. But like you, the Department of General Services has a difficult time setting policy with, right? So we would really require the assistance of the council and the mayor.
Some direction on that. Okay, good to know. And then the last follow-up on that is, of those ones that you did find had full access, if you will, we can call it full access, the ability to sign off on their own procurements. Did you do any analysis on what they ordered, or those ones that were using old SMS numbers from retired, transferred, deceased employees, and what they actually were using the system for? Was there any analysis of that?
During the course of the audit, there were 2 particular departments where we noted that this was a problem, and we worked very closely with those user departments to ensure that these were not, in fact, fraudulent purchases or something for personal gain. We talk about it in the audit. There were typical city necessary supplies, and we did see paperwork and the actual receipt of those goods that were for the use of that department. But the user departments in that case were also very surprised and confounded and agreed to remedy the situation immediately. But that's what came up within our test work of this.
Right. Yeah, we have not encountered any resistance from departments. They do see this as an important issue.
All right. Well, maybe out of this committee, I'll leave that up to the committee chair. We can come up with some new policies to ensure those things don't happen. We have a check and balance system. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Englander. The personnel department, when it comes to the departure of city employees, no matter what department, I assume it goes through the personnel department, where they receive the ID card and then decommission that access to buildings. Maybe we should somehow link up with the personnel department be responsible for moving these folks in the system, because you've got so many different departments and so many different levels. It seems that the one central department that is informed when employees leave the city of Los Angeles will be the personnel department. How practical would it be for the personnel department to have that responsibility, to have access only to remove individuals, and put the burden on the personnel department to make sure it's done? Because what you're saying, there's a number of folks that have left that still technically have access. Controller.
I think the solution is actually fairly simple, and it does take actually populating an existing field within SMS to record the employee ID number, which is something that is used citywide for payroll purposes. That field exists, but it's not currently being used. So right now, you've got an SMS user ID, and you need to go through a key to figure out exactly who does that belong to. And there wasn't an easy way to really reconcile or eliminate that user without going through the same process, basically, that was used to set up the user. So I think that's maybe what John is talking about.
That's our plan. Our plan is to use that employee ID as the referential integer so we can link to Pacer. And by all means, we'd be happy to look at other alternatives if there's some other way of streamlining.
But you're probably not the only department that has this situation. GSD does a lot of purchasing, but I'm sure the police department, fire department, they probably have access to purchasing and other departments.
That's correct. And I'm speaking as a representative from GSD, but the SMS system is a citywide system. It's not just used by GSD employees.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Our fix would
Only affect GSD?
No, it would not. It would spread out to all SMS users.
To all SMS users?
Correct.
Police and fire and everything else?
Correct.
So how do we implement that?
Well, again, we work very closely with ITA on all of our system issues. We met and discussed this, and ITA and GSD feel that the best source of this information is the city's payroll system. If there's another way of doing it with personnel, by all means, we'd be happy to explore it.
I just want to get it done so we don't have these problems, because it's a great audit, and it shows obviously people, I'm not saying they were thieves, but somehow someone used someone's number to order items that were necessary for a department, but it wasn't done in a legitimate, approved fashion, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Understand, and we share that sentiment, Councilman. We will certainly double back and check with personnel and see if there's some other system that we're not aware of that can provide this information in a more timely fashion.
So how far backlog would you have to go to get current with your GSD folks?
It would be 2010. I don't know when the last time the scrub was
About
done.
a year.
So, yes.
All right, so let's do the action would be instruct GSD to submit a written report on the progress of synchronizing SMS and FMS. Instruct GSD to work with the departments listed in the audit in implementing said recommendations in the controller's audit, and to report back in 45 days. And in addition to that, check with personnel department and find out if that is an easy accessibility, because I know some city employees leave with their ID card. I don't know if it's deactivated as far as having access to locked areas, but when people have numbers and access, and sometimes people do things they're not supposed to do. So what we want to do is keep it efficient, keep it honest, and keep it safe and secure. So if we can follow that process and then come back in 45 days, if you can make that deadline, whatever is going to work to correct this so it doesn't happen again.
Understand.
And if you need to have, further information from the controller, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to assist in that. But ultimately, when someone leaves, that number is retired, and that number can't be used for anything, period. And I think that once we plug that loophole, we'll get back on an even keel. Because once we get into computer systems, like if you want phone access, you dial a number that needs a code, someone will borrow someone else's code to have access to the phone. So we have a lot of access and a lot of ability. I know in the police department, when you run someone through the system, it logs that person, it keeps a record of that person. So when you're checking a criminal history, they know who did it and when they did it. So we've got to have these checks and balances. So the controller found some areas that were deficient. We've identified those. So let's come back in 45 days and then make sure we can plug it so there's no more misuse, inappropriate use. Anything else, Mr. Engler?
That's all I got.
All right, thank you, folks. Let's go to number 2, please.
Item number 2, City Control reports relative to follow-up correspondence to the review of volume discounts for commodity contracts.
All righty, take it away.
Again, like just a brief overview, and then...
That's fine. You did fine last time.
Okay. This review was issued in December of '09. There were really, it started out really to be a follow-up on the collection or the ability to collect on lost volume discounts that we had previously identified back in 2007. But the report actually had 3 primary findings. So in addition to we have not actually fully collected some of those previously identified lost discounts, we also noted that volume discounts were not generally considered in selecting or awarding commodity contracts. We had recommended that GSD actually broaden their current practices to proactively encourage bidders to offer discount provisions at various thresholds. What was being done at the time of the audit was when an RFP or a competitive solicitation went out, there was notification of what our anticipated or estimated purchases for those items would be, with a invitation for a bidder to submit your best pricing and a additional volume discount if that threshold was reached, which was typically thought to be, by the end of the contract or the anticipated life of the purchasing agreement. The third area that we noted was that at that time, GSD had lacked an automated process to ensure that volume discounts were applied timely and accurately. Again, up till that time, there was the trigger point for those contracts that did have volume discount provisions was reaching a cumulative threshold in purchasing under that contract. Up and until that time, it was really up to the procurement specialist to really look at the cumulative items that had been ordered, and at that point initiated a contract amendment to basically avail of that discount. So we had recommended that GSD establish more automated controls that would eliminate the burden from particular procurement analysts so that they could use some type of an automated tool to be able to trigger an amendment to reach that volume discount.
Okay.
Ken Desowitz, Department of General Services.
Are you a consumer shopper?
Yes, sir.
You shop coupons.
Yes, sir.
How much do you save?
Maybe between $10 and $20 at the grocery market.
Yeah, I shop consumer. I'm a consumer fanatic. I will get more discount than I end up paying for the bill. So my discount will be like $100 and I'll pay $20. So this really triggered my interest. And when I'm buying one car or two cars or 5 cars or 100 cars or gasoline, the more I buy, the bigger the discount. So I'll be interested to see how, since you're a consumer shopper like me, how we make this work.
First and foremost, I wanted to say that
But my colleague calls me cheap, but I'm a consumer shopper.
Fiscally conservative, sir. All due respect.
Thank you.
in accordance with the controller's request in their audit, we have developed a more automated tool within the SMS system that was just described as a very detailed, complicated query that was drafted, and we extract the information each month, and each month this report is distributed to the supervisors, the procurement staff, and the procurement management to make sure that we are capturing the discounts that are established in contracts in a timely manner.
Yeah, and isn't there a deal that if we pay our bill within 30 days or 60 days, whatever, that we get an additional discount from the controller?
Some contracts allow for that provision. That's actually the next item.
I believe that's the next agenda item.
If we
Councilman.
pay, but that's the question, if we pay like we're supposed to. Okay. So how long has that been in operation, that system?
This query was finalized, I believe, a year ago, June.
Okay,
So
so it's relatively new.
yes, but shortly after the audit recommendations, we were able to.
And we did note it as implemented, those
Right.
3 recommendations.
And you're pleased with that?
Yes.
Are you a consumer shopper?
When it's worth my while.
It's always worth my while. Okay.
We, again, General Services agreed with the majority of the recommendations in that audit and have either implemented or are in the process of implementing them. Just generally speaking, when we talk in terms of volume discounts, Sari mentioned it, when we establish or set up a contract or a bid, we poll the different departments that we buy for. We buy for police, we buy for fire, we buy for sanitation, rec and parks, et cetera. The 3 different fleet groups for police, fire, and general services. We poll to see what the demand is going to be for a particular contract. And we put that as our annual estimated expenditure, and the bid is evaluated based on that estimated expenditure. We also, as Controller mentioned, include a provision in our contracts or bids for additional volume threshold discount above and beyond that original estimated expenditure. And it varies by commodity. For instance, on our automotive parts contract, it was estimated to be a $10 million contract.
Gee, just for the parts?
These are for non-OEM parts. And our contract is with a local company. It went through a bid process. The company is Warren Distributing. I don't know if you're familiar with them. And we get written bids back from companies because we post these bids on the internet, and we get written bids back, and we compare those bids. In this instance, we get bids ranging from discounts for batteries, automotive batteries at 30%, or lights, lamps with it for automotive headlamps at 70%. And it may not mean or seem like it means much in terms of these discounts, but when you actually compare prices with a Napa, it really hits home. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read just a short comparison.
Please.
For Delco batteries, our contract price is about $55. You walk into Napa and you're paying about $90 for that same battery.
Same one.
For lamps, $3.59. At a Napa, you're paying close to $8. Auto filters, Motorcraft, about $8 and change, almost $15 at a Napa. Shock absorbers, Monroe, $25. At a Napa, you're looking at about $42. For a motorcycle,
Now, when you say Napa,
I'm talking about a retail.
I know what you're talking about, but just for the
Oh, I'm sorry.
purpose
It's
of
a retail outlet like a AutoZone, but Napa is
all the others, AutoZone,
Pep
Napa,
Boys.
Yes.
Boys.
Yes.
We're not
Those-
singling out or,
No,
I'm going to get letters from Napa.
I'm sorry.
Hey,
Okay.
well, if they're too expensive, they're too expensive. We'll go on the record for that.
They have
And I'm
coupons.
talking about retail.
Right.
Because
Retail
we're comparing
versus-
retail versus what we are.
We should be paying wholesale minus.
Exactly. Because Napa will give us a competitive price, and they did bid on this, and they didn't bid these prices that I'm describing. I'm just talking about prices when we go out.
Retail, walking in the store.
Exactly.
Okay.
The motorcycle parts, our contract is with Laidlaws. So for an engine filter, we're looking at, we pay around close to $7.
For an engine what?
For an engine filter.
Oil filter.
Oil filter,
Oil
I'm
filter.
sorry, an oil filter. And just walking in off the street at a Bike Bandit or a Glendale Harley Davidson kind of place, it's close to $9. So a couple of dollar difference.
Right.
Brake pads, $33 and change, $44 at a retail outlet. For a motorcycle tire, pay about $150, and you're looking at about $200 at a retail outlet.
Well, we're both motorcycle riders, so we're aware of the significant cost in that. But there's always that place that's going to do a loss leader, and we'll see that in the supermarket ads, where they're going to get grapes for 49 cents, and then next week it's $1.50 a pound. So I don't know if we ever shop loss leaders, but when we're shopping huge volume, whether it be tires for the cars or diesel for the fire vehicles or gasoline, we're buying huge volumes. And the normal company obviously doesn't buy what we buy. The state, the federal government, they have large purchases. Do we ever work in coordination with other departments to say, okay, instead of buying 100 cars, we're going to buy 5,000 cars to get a better discount, a bigger discount? Do we ever work in coordination with that on some of these things?
Yes. We work very extensively with LA County and other state agencies to coordinate our purchases. We're very active in the purchasing professional organizations so that we're able to get together and do regional cooperatives, national cooperatives. We utilize, did a joint bid with LA County on paper, copy paper. We utilize their toner contracts for OEM and non-OEM toner. We buy our playground equipment through a national cooperative. We buy our computer equipment through a regional cooperative called WSTCA, Western States Contracting Alliance.
Are you the man who does the coordination of all those?
Yes, I am. And me and the procurement staff, there are websites that have advertisements of these opportunities, and we're very active in searching those out. even with our existing contracts, we do what we call market research and do price comparisons with other agencies.
That's a great job. I love to do that job. Sit there and go shopping all day.
Well, if we could get an unfreeze for a procurement position, we'd love to have you.
I will squeeze that nickel so much that Buffalo will say, please release me, let me go. No, because when you buy volume, and I learned a long time ago, you buy volume, you get a great discount. Sometimes you have to ask for it because they'd rather move, just like Costco moves huge merchandise. You don't get a box of cereal, you get a case of cereal. I mean, everything in Costco is big. So it's not basically for the single person, but when you want to last for a year, that's how they volume merchandise.
Well,
So,
and you
sounds
talk
like
about
we're
a
on the right
Costco
track.
and that type of an arrangement. We also I manage the warehousing operations. We do our stores for support for the 40 different departments, and we buy in bulk, and we store it, and we do the distribution, and we save staff time and staff dollars in terms of payment processing and all that, because we're buying in large quantity, and then we're stocking it in our warehousing operations.
Well, I know that when, for example, a council office orders something, they'll order from Staples, or they'll order from Home Depot, they'll order from different. Does GSD have the connection with all departments and offices? Because sometimes I'll see a Costco business truck parked outside of City Hall where they're delivering. Are some people going around this process and ordering instead of going through the process that we've had to save money?
In some cases, there's a delegated, what we call delegated purchasing authority, where any city employee can, if they're authorized, can buy a product that's under $1,000 in a transaction. Now, they're not supposed to buy items that are covered by contract, and we do have a process in place where we monitor that. Now, that monitoring is very difficult and tedious, and we don't have a lot of labor dedicated to doing that monitoring, but it does happen, yes.
But maybe we need to send out a reminder that we do have a central purchasing, and you order it, and you get it in a week or so. Is that delivery time normally?
In some cases, it's same day, next day,
To
depending on
GSD?
when they order it.
So I think that maybe there has to be a reminder, because some offices, I mean, I wouldn't see a business Costco out here delivering if they weren't being ordered. Somebody in City Hall's ordering stuff.
Generally, we send out a reminder at the beginning of the fiscal year, because that's when departments' blanket authorities are established, and this is this process that I'm talking about where it's under $1,000. We call that the blanket authority purchasing process.
And that's a function that I oversee. We do have a user guideline that is distributed to all approved blanket and coordinators.
Did it go to the council offices?
Yes, it does.
It does? Because we maybe want to remind them of that, because somehow people are ordering. And I know that every department has a fund in this, and when money's tight as it can be, we want to make sure we can spend it wisely. But if you're stockpiling merchandise for that particular purpose, why not use it? You already purchased it. City Attorney,
Sir.
what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, it occurred to me that what Ken was mentioning about what we call piggyback contracts probably occurs in over 10% of what we buy. The work that Ken and John and their group do passes over my desk for the mandatory city attorney review. And just so that you know, the law mandates that we consider piggyback contracts, so that we're working with other contractors, other states, other localities, other groups of states, and if they are the lowest, we will go with them. So we have any number of ways, and Ken's far better equipped to tell you than I, of finding that lowest responsible and responsive bidder. So either through the piggyback process or through the straight bid and receipt of that bid process. So,
And is there a preference for local business?
yes.
How's that?
Let me describe that. There's a 10% price preference for purchases under $100,000 for companies that are certified as small and local. Small being under $3 million in revenue, and local being LA County.
What about LA City?
The charter prohibits at this time a differentiation between LA County and LA City. Because of the way it's worded in the charter, it allows for a preference for LA County firms.
So we'd be buying out of Beverly Hills versus West Los Angeles. or
Good.
Glendale instead of Tarzana, which means that that city, we're paying sales tax, I assume.
Yes.
So we're paying sales tax to another city, helping their economy.
Yes.
Sounds like a charter change. I mean, preference should be Los Angeles, and then LA County, and then other jurisdictions. I know when they bought the food for the Michael Jackson Memorial, they went to Wrightwood, and they spent a fortune on the food, which was a major controversy that developed out of the controller's office. Why are we buying up at Jansen's in not Wrightwood, I think it was Wrightwood, if I'm not mistaken.
The other
Or
preference.
Big Bear, Arrowhead, I think it was Arrowhead, someplace up there in the mountains.
The other preference is an 8% preference that the council enacted, and it's still in process in terms of implementing in terms of an ordinance. And that is irrespective of whether it's a small local business. It's just a local preference, and there's no dollar limitation.
Local would be Los Angeles City.
No, it's still LA County.
Really? So it's a charter change that has to take place.
Correct.
Jennifer, will you look into that, please? I don't know why, and I was a charter commissioner, I don't remember that coming up, but it seems we would give to ourselves and give to our neighbor. Not that we don't like LA County, but we have to love the city first. Okay, so what triggers the volume discount? What triggers that?
It's exceeding the original estimated expenditure on a contract.
Okay.
If a company bids this additional threshold discount, and we exceed that amount and the original estimate, then the threshold is triggered, and we process a contract amendment and take advantage of the additional discount.
Okay, and how many contracts currently offer volume discounts?
We have about 150 of our 450 contracts that have volume discounts, many of which we have not reached the threshold.
Okay. And in what instances do we miss discounts which are available to us? How would we miss?
Well,
Because the audit showed we missed some.
yes, since the development of the query that Ken showed you early on, we haven't missed any.
Okay. And how do we know we are being offered the best rate for a product? What type of market research does the department do in advance of awarding a bid?
Again, we do market research with other agencies and their contract prices. We do informal bids where we're getting, these aren't what I would call competitive formal solicitations. They're informal solicitations where we're asking different companies that would be interested in bidding what their pricing might be if we were to do a formal bid. So it's kind of what we call informal research. And then we also look at other cooperative contracts that are out there. So it's a combination of all of that research that lends into the decision, do we piggyback, do we do our own bid, and what should that pricing look like if we do either?
So there's multiple avenues that we go down.
Absolutely.
Okay, and if we receive one bid, what happens if we only get one bid on an item?
It depends. In some instances, we may rebid. In some instances, we may be doing a bid knowing that we're likely only to get one bid. We may have a history of getting several bids, and then we only get one or two bids, and we may ask, why we didn't get bids from certain companies, and, we get answers like, the sales rep was on vacation or it was overlooked, and we may rebid based on that.
If I got you on the Price is Right, you think you'd win?
I think I do damn well.
Well, I might do that for you, because I know the person in charge of that. That'd be interesting, put you on there and see how you do. And we'll put Wendy Gruhl on there and see how she does. No, but it's a very competitive market, and obviously business wants to thrive. We want to get the best bargain for the dollar and provide, because we need products.
And I do want to say that all this work is being done by approximately 18 individuals. That's all you have in
For the
terms
whole
of
city.
doing centralized procurement for the city of Los Angeles. You really need to understand that we have a centralized procurement system. We use an automated system to enhance that efficiency, but ultimately it's the work of
18
approximately 18 individuals that gets this done. We process about 4,000 one-time POs in addition to managing those 450 annual contracts. And the city spends, well, last fiscal year it was down, so it was about $380 million a year in goods that go through the authority of the purchasing agent.
It's a lot of goods.
It's a lot of goods.
So what calls for action, instruct the GST to report back in 30 days with a clear path of action on how to take advantage of all volume discounts offered. I think we might already be doing that. Would you say?
I think the controller would agree that
We're doing everything. Is there any opportunity to review more, or do you think that's it?
Yeah, our original recommendation really had to do with varying the levels, as well as consulting with the city attorney to determine if we could actually affirmatively require them to either state one way or the other, would they or wouldn't we?
We can't do that, though.
And apparently we cannot. Is that?
That's
The
true.
attorney advises against that.
And that's correct. It would really undermine the competitive bidding and the market per se.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to get a discount on the, 1,001 through 2,000 units, but cause that discount to boost the price of the 1 through 1,000 units that we really are concerned with. So the competitive bidding process, the market, that's what really controls this.
And we know gold prices are very high today, and tomorrow we don't know where they're going to be.
And fuel is rising. And fuel is rising.
Fuel is rising, yeah. And it's amazing that fuel is rising when the East Coast was plagued with the hurricane and there wasn't anything happening. And now it's continuing to rise when you think it should be coming down. And Labor Day's passed, because you thought it'd always rise for a holiday. You think it'd be coming down, but it's not coming down. But we buy in large volumes to sustain us for a period of time, and then that's the open market. But because I watch the stock market daily, and it's been a crazy roller coaster of late, which obviously affects everything we want to purchase.
Our contract is based on the Opus index, and we get a discount from that index. So, yes.
What's gold at today?
It was at over 1,800.
Yeah, it'll hit $2,000.
absolutely.
That's when China buys Greece and Italy, when it gets $2,000. That's my prediction. Okay. How about the GSD to continue to work with the city attorney to collect the correct amount of volume discounts from the 5 vendors who have refused to pay or offer what? 5 vendors who have refused to pay or offer settlement? What about that?
There were, after the initial review by the controller, we did go back and we tried to collect the missed volume
Difference?
discounts. Yes. And some of our vendors were cooperative, some of them disputed the legal basis for us asking them for their, for the refund. We worked with the city attorney at the time. It wasn't Julianne, so it's not fair to look over her attention, but the city attorney that we worked with at the time did take the file and referred it to the collections division of their office.
How much do they owe?
Oh,
Or we estimate?
I don't believe I have that.
Does the controller's office know? So it's
Does have
kind
it
of
up there.
like those parking lot owners that owe us $23 million. And we got to go hunt them down to collect.
Yeah, I'm afraid, Councilman, I don't have that information available.
Is it substantial? Would you say?
I would hate to even venture a guess. I deal
Million?
with so many numbers a day, Councilman, I wouldn't,
Okay.
I would hate to steer you wrong,
right.
but I can certainly get that information for you.
Well, let's do that, because I noticed that's part of the question here. 5 vendors. Is only 5 vendors refused to pay our office settlement?
Correct. And again, there was a challenge on the legal basis for us.
Are we still dealing with them? Purchasing items from them?
I believe they're still active bidders.
We
I
should-
don't know if we have any active orders with them, but I believe they're active bidders.
Well, there's got to be some action that the city attorney could direct if they're not following through with the agreement, that we cease and desist business with them.
Well, again, that's where we have some dispute on the language that was used at the time on the contracts, and whether or not there wasn't a legal and binding agreement between the city and these vendors. So that's why we refer the matter over to the city attorney.
Okay, so why don't we bring that back to this committee and get closure on the 5 vendors who refused to pay our offered settlement, whatever the status is, and get that back to this committee within 45 days and find out. Because if they're not going to pony up to what they owe, then I'd say we make a motion to discontinue and seek legal action if they owe us some money. The thing that troubles me about the city is oftentimes people owe us money, and we may just send them a credit letter, but we don't follow past that. We need to like do liens and seizures. City attorney put some deputy sheriffs over the hotel that owed us money, and some people were coming in to check in. They were collecting the revenues that owed the city. I mean, there's got to be a way to collect when people are not following through with what their commitment is. Mr. Engler and I would put them in jail if we could, but we can't do that today.
And we're looking at 45 days for that, correct?
Pardon me?
45 days on that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's sufficient time for you?
Yes, I just want to be consistent if we can on all
Yeah.
the report backs.
Yeah, that's fine. If you need more time, we can always approve that, and the city attorney can work on that to find out. Maybe the 5's down to 2, maybe there's only 2, but hopefully some of them come around. And the consumer shopper, I'm going to try and get you booked on The Price is Right, and we'll all be watching there on the screen as you make the city look proud. We could like put you against some of the other cities.
That'll work.
What do you think about that?
I'm not a betting man, but I would put money on.
We'll have you as his partner there. How's that?
I would put money on Ken.
Okay, no, because when it comes to purchasing, we purchase so many items, and every dollar we're spending is taxpayers' money, so the better bang for the buck, obviously, the better it is, so I commend you on that. It's a fine opportunity. That'll be the recommendation, Mr. Engler? Thank you. So number 3, please.
Number 3, General Services Department and City Controller to report relative to the audit of early payments to vendors and the feasibility of automating the supply management system and the financial management information system for payments later in the billing cycle if the vendor does not offer an early payment discount.
See, I knew I studied this somewhere, and there it was, the early payment discount.
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
Rick Taguchi, Controller's Office. This particular audit was issued in December 2009. Just in the way of background, the city purchases about $2.5 billion a year in goods and services.
Billion or million?
Billion,
As in B?
yes, goods and services.
That includes services, which does not come through the SMS system.
Right, okay.
I'll talk about that later.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And we deal with thousands of vendors. The city's general practice has been to pay bills within 30 days of the later of when the invoice comes in or the date the goods were received. And of course, if a discount is available, the goal should be to pay within that discount period. The objective of the audit was to determine if the city could increase its investment earnings by paying closer to the payment due dates. In general, what we found was that departments pay the bills as soon as possible. So they really don't take into consideration that they can maybe delay payments closer to when they're due to maximize interest earnings. We found that the city could increase investment earnings by several $1 million a year by paying vendors closer to these due dates instead of paying as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the solution is relatively easy. Again, payments are made or initiated through 2 different systems. For services, the payments are initiated at the time of the audit through the MIS system, and for commodities, the payments were initiated through the SMS system managed by GSD. But then the SMS system would pass transactions to FMIS to actually pay the bill. Both systems had a scheduled payment date feature. With respect to FMIS, the feature was being used on a very limited basis. We spoke to 6 departments. Either the departments did not know about the feature or they didn't know how to use it. With respect to SMS, GSD and ITA reported that there is some type of feature built into the system that's available, but they would have to do research to see how that could be used in the city. Now, since that time, this city has implemented the FMS system. So there is an automatic scheduled payment date feature in that system. And basically the way it works is that, let's say the goods come in September 1st. The invoice comes in September 5th. So they put those dates into the system, and the system automatically calculates 30 days from the later of those 2 dates, which would be October 5th. And then the system would automatically hold that information into the system until that date occurs and then make the payment. So in that respect, it's kind of transparent to departments because they can go ahead and process all the work. It kind of works like your own personal checking account where you schedule a payment whenever you want, but you can go ahead and put the data into the system right away. So We have someone here from our other unit that can maybe talk about, if you want to hear later on exactly how that's working.
Does it also show penalty on late payments, that if you don't pay within a certain period of time, there's a charge, penalty?
I would have to defer to,
Generally, we don't have those. We generally just go by a discount, get 10 loss from the controller's office. So
But say you have a situation that says if it's 31 days, or like your credit card, if you don't pay your credit card on time,
Correct.
there's a surcharge and a fee and this and that.
you're right, and that does happen, like in escrows and other types of things. And so in those situations, they could enter a scheduled payment date and get it paid earlier to make sure that they meet that date. And the department's very aware of when those late penalties are.
Okay. Have we ever done an audit on how much we pay in late penalties? That'd be an audit. See how much we've paid in late penalties because we haven't paid within
Coming from the controller's office and being that person there at 6 p.m. who gets those phone calls that we have to get this payment out or else we get a late penalty.
Oh.
It's pretty low.
So you do get those calls? Yeah. Rush that check out.
Rush that check out. We can't have a late penalty.
Okay.
well, that kind of good segue to my next issue, and that's that most contracts do not specify when payment is due to the vendor, or when we should say most contracts do not specify when the vendor should submit an invoice, nor does it indicate when the city should pay the vendor.
It doesn't say like pay within 30 days or 40 days or 45 days?
Not usually. Now, for commodities, it may be different. Commodities, I believe it indicates that the vendor shall submit the invoice within a particular period of time, but still does not address when the city should pay the vendor. So one of our recommendations was for the city to clarify that or make a policy with respect to putting terms into different contracts. And again, some of these aren't even contracts. Some of them are like AFEs.
Yeah.
So, and those really are pretty silent in terms of when the payment is due.
GSP, what do you have to say?
Our contracts have very specific payment terms and where the invoices are supposed to go, and if it's net 30, the payment's made within 30 days. If there's a discount associated with the payment terms, like a 2% 30 days,
Yeah.
or 2% 15 days, and the payment's made within 15 days.
Okay. So we adhere to
He is really referring to some services contracts and, like he said, AFEs that
Okay,
have
those are
real no
different.
contractual terms associated with them.
Right. Okay. That's much different than what we're referring to. Okay. Anything further?
No.
All right, thank you. So it sounds like the departments are aware of the timelines and the limits, and to avoid any problems, to pay the bills.
We can, again, speak to the folks using the SMS system, and yes, they are aware. We do average about 30 to 31 days in paying our vendors who do not offer cash discounts, payment discounts.
Okay. So the current practice in scheduling payments, we do have a process consistent with, it's not consistent with every vendor, though. It's different with every vendor?
Correct, and the audit is correct. We do have features in SMS that will allow us for scheduling payments, and we have researched and seen where we can activate that. We do need to test now that the city has its new FMS system and make sure that there aren't any conflicts. That is our plan. Just have not gotten there. We've had some other priorities.
And the normal due date for payment in the business is normally, the norm would be 30 days,
Yes.
Yes.
just generally? Okay. And regarding holding that payment until it's due, how much do we estimate we could keep for the city?
It was,
If we were to pay at the last moment, like,
well, it says up to $8 million a year, but,
to save?
well, that was one thing. It was based on an interest rate of 6.3%, which was.
Whoa, what number?
30-year average. It was a 30-year average that we went by.
6%, you know what the interest rate is now?
I know what it is now.
You get like 20 cents on a dollar, or 2 cents on a dollar.
But
That's
we
ridiculous.
can't predict what the interest rate is going to be over the next several years, so we went with
Well, in Greece and Italy, it's going to be zero.
the 30-year average.
Oh, it's terrible right now. 8 million is really that's a huge number, 6%. I mean, people aren't getting 6%. I think the only time we got any money on investments down in the Carter administration, when it was like 16 and 17%. Should have put your money in then. Now you're getting basically nothing on it. So the SMS, when's that supposed to come online, full implementation?
Well, the system never really went offline, per se. We did suspend activities during the implementation of FMS for about a 6-week period, and we are now interfacing our transactions to FMS. This was not a feature we looked at. We were more focused on the day-to-day activities that were currently in place to make sure that the city would continue to operate and we continue to be able to pay our bills, and the departments would be able to purchase what they needed in order to protect and serve the city. Now we're still doing some data cleanups and some data reconciliation. It's a small percentage of the orders that didn't make it through the initial conversion process. Those are important because we have bills to pay, and we're holding up payments to vendors. So our focus right now is resolving that small portion of orders that didn't go through. Then we can look at things like this that will improve the process.
So full implementation, you say a couple more months?
To be totally honest with you, if I can get to them,
You don't want to lie here. You got
Nope,
two cops.
I won't do that. I won't do that.
We got 3 cops, Officer Johnson over there.
Our initial recommendation was January of 2012.
Okay.
We'll do everything we can to meet that. Our data cleanup efforts are taking a little longer than we anticipated. We may have to push it a month or two, and we may be looking at March, but we'll make every effort to
Okay, so why don't
implement
we
these
can we
fixes.
leave this just open? Okay, what we'll do is we'll continue this open till we get that full implementation, then we can bring it back to state, then we have closure.
Very good.
So whatever time you need, we'll just leave it open on the schedule, and then when you get it done, you can contact the office, we'll get it scheduled for a committee hearing, and that way we can close it up.
Okay, well,
It sounds like things are moving forward. but
In many
it's not.
regards, Councilman, this also applies to item number 1 on the agenda. You know, where we've got several items on that pertaining to user access and user controls that, again, our recommendation was January. We're going to do our very best to meet that January timeframe, but again, it may slip to February or March.
Okay, I understand. Well, we'll be here February, March.
Very good.
Right, Mitch?
We'll be here.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Any other questions? Any other things? City Attorney, you happy with that? Oh, Mr.
Not
Englander.
on item
Mike.
3.
Mr. Englander. All right, what'd you say?
Not on item 3.
Okay, okay.
Well,
Mr. Englander.
since these are all intertwined, let me just get back to one thing. You mentioned that it's roughly $2.5 billion in procurement and goods and services throughout the city annually, and that we have a 10% bonus, if you will, to small and local businesses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Local meaning anywhere in LA County, because that was the definition of the charter, which we're going to look up.
Can I clarify one thing before you go any further, Councilman? What the controller was referring to was all expenditures coming out of the city. The SMS system, at the time of the audit, I think we were roughly around $450 million for that fiscal year. So we were a small percentage of all the activity that was going on in the city.
Yes, that's correct. We show $400 million with the audit for SMS payments.
Okay, so you anticipate that number accurately to be
That
closer
number
now
actually
to-
dropped last fiscal year to
380.
350?
I thought it was around 380.
Okay.
What I was going to get into more on is the, does that include auto, fleet, everything else?
I'm sorry?
Does that include fleet
Yes,
acquisition?
Yes.
That goes through SMS as well?
yes.
And so with that, and the fact that we're giving that 10%, I understand the 8% is on hold right now, pending an ordinance that's sitting in the city attorney's office. I know the council voted on it. I don't know what happened after that, why it's still sitting in the city attorney's office. Do you have any input on
I do
where that might be?
not, but I can check.
Okay, if you can report back on that as well. I think it's critical. But with that, and it appears that it's going to require a charter change, which I think we'll work on immediately in terms of locale. But do we analyze in lowest cost to include the benefit coming back to the city? In other words, if we're paying sales tax on $300 to $400 million in goods, let me proceed that with another question first. What's the percentage of all those purchases that were done in the city, not locally, but in the city of Los Angeles? of the $2.5 billion in goods and services? What percentage was actually done in the city of Los Angeles?
The reason I'm smiling, and John is smiling, we just did a presentation for the core group, the
Right.
revenue efficiency group,
I saw the report.
and they asked us to differentiate between LA City awards and LA County awards, and we just ran the analysis for the last 6 months of last fiscal year.
Right.
And my recollection is that the two totaled close to 50%, but I don't remember now this differentiation between LA County and LA City, and maybe,
You know, we
And of the fleet, how many vehicles, how much money did we spend in vehicle acquisition in those last 6 months?
not as much as you might think, because the
$66 million, as I recall from the report. Is that accurate, roughly?
that could be.
And of those $66 million that we would have benefited from sales tax revenue, how many vehicles were actually purchased in the city of Los Angeles of that in the last 6 months?
Well, that's where we have a problem, because the way our purchase orders are structured in the SMS system, we do not have a way of querying to find out what item was purchased. We can query, and what we did for the core group was query the vendor name.
We've spent $66 million in vehicles. We have no idea where we purchased them from.
Well, we do it off the vendor name, and we can
Okay, so the question is,
look at it.
of those vehicles that were purchased, how many were purchased in the city of Los Angeles? The answer was none, based on the report from CORE that they got from you, is what they stated in council on the record. So you might want to check back with them.
The core group didn't have our report until about a week and a half ago.
They reported to council, and they submitted the documentation, and
I
they
don't know-
testified at council.
I don't know where they
None.
got their information, because they didn't have our data at the
You
time.
might want to circle back with them on that.
We
Not
did touch
quite
bases with the city clerk.
because they said it was none. With that, do we give and take into account the discount to the local bidders, or any bidders? In other words, if we're buying a vehicle and one vehicle is $100, literally $100 less than another vehicle, one vehicle is being purchased in the city of LA and one's being purchased in Calabasas. Since the sales tax would then stay in Calabasas, the sales tax back to the city far outweighs that $100. Do we take any of that into account?
No,
Any benefit back to the city of LA? Is there?
not in that scenario. And I think that's why the local preference was enacted, to address that issue. We do take into,
But the local preference wasn't on bid price. It was on, it was the 8%. From my understanding, it's not on low-cost bid.
No, it is.
It's on performance.
no, it's both. RFPs and competitive bids. With an RFP, the preference would be applied by giving a certain proposer.
Well, you just addressed the fact that that's why that 8% local preference, which is sitting in the city attorney's office waiting to come back, would cure that. However, local means county, so it wouldn't cure that. The scenario I gave was if we bought a car in Calabasas versus on Ventura Boulevard in Councilman Zine's district,
Vista Ford,
Vista Ford.
plug. Galpin Ford.
Yeah, Galpin, thank you very much. If we were comparing apples to apples, even if we had the 8% procurement, it would make a difference, the benefit. Because right now is the way the charter reads, but that doesn't mean we can't interpret the true cost benefit back to the city. Is there no method to do that, and there's a reason why we don't?
We'll research it with the city attorney's office and see if we can do that.
Okay, because that has nothing to do really with either changing the charter and/or the 8% benefit to bidders. That's just a matter of how we interpret the numbers internally, I would think. So if we can have that come back, does it make sense what I'm asking?
It does.
Okay, so if we can have that come back. Looking at $500 million to $2.5 billion, that's a wide range, from goods and services. That's substantial. So I'd love to hear back what the numbers were in the city of Los Angeles, and if we can have a method to apply that comparative analysis, that cost benefit back to the city. We're looking at what that would mean if we actually purchased it in Los Angeles, that differential. Great.
Makes sense?
Thank you.
Okay, we're almost done. Okay, for the controller, the most alarming findings you made in the audit?
Well, again, I would say that it was that the departments did not take into consideration potential investment earnings when processing the bills.
Okay. And GSD implemented 12 recommendations, correct? 12 partially.
I believe, did we move on to item,
Oh, we're still, I'm sorry. I moved on.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was done, and Mr. Engler had some questions. I think I'm done with the questions I had, except, I think, I had moved on to the next one, you're right. So just want to, no, we wanted to continue, we're on number 4 now. We finished number 3.
Okay.
Okay, I thought we were, because we talked about full implementation, SMS, and then Mr. Engler asked some questions. Meanwhile, I moved on to number 4.
Okay.
So we're going to close number 3, we're going to continue number 3.
Okay.
Okay, and then let's go to number 4.
Item number 4, City Controller reports relative to the performance audit of the City of Los Angeles' commodity procurement practices and subsequent follow-up correspondence.
Okay. Okay, Controller, take it away.
This audit was issued back in June of 2009, and it was performed by a consultant under the supervision of the controller. So I have here Fred Bristow of Harvey Rose Associates, who performed the audit.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Zine and members of the committee. Fred Brousseau from Harvey Rose Associates. The audit, as Siri mentioned, was issued in June 2009. At the time, there was about $468 million in commodities being purchased by the city, most of which were purchased through contract purchase orders. And that was about $372 million. 87.4 million purchased through one-time purchase orders, and then a smaller amount, 8 million, purchased through blanket purchase orders. Since some time has ensued since the audit was issued, I just want to point out one thing. The department, GSD, was in the middle of upgrading the SMS system while the audit was in place. So a number of our recommendations had to do with improved analysis and review of purchases that were made and expenditures, some of which wasn't being done at the time and may be now with more capability on the part of SMS. So we had 12 finding areas. I'll just give sort of a highlight statement about each one. First, we found that end users were defining the commodity specifications and the vendors that were used in the majority of one-time purchase orders. About 57.7% of the one-time purchase orders we reviewed in the sample the specifications were the same after they went through GSD as what the end users were preparing. And similarly, about 68% of the suppliers identified by the end user departments were the suppliers who were ultimately selected after the GSD review. We have recommendations for improving the review process so that the department is adding more value to the process and ensuring that the best specifications are written in a way that doesn't result in a particular supplier being selected. Second finding area had to do with competitive bidding. Here we again looked at a sample of contract purchase orders, and we found that in 35% of the cases of what we reviewed, only one bid had been submitted, and in another 19%, only 2 bids had been submitted. So the competition and the benefits of competition were being limited in a number of contracts, and there was an issue with the department in terms of attracting and making sure that the maximum number of vendors bid so that greater savings would be realized. We estimated about slightly over $12 million in potential additional costs because of the average savings that are achieved when 3 or more vendors bid on a contract. In another area, we reviewed the a number of contracts in place for a single vendor where the vendor has one or more contracts that were negotiated separately or has a contract and also it was awarded a number of one-time purchase orders. There were about 70 suppliers in that situation with about $71 million worth of expenditures tied to them, and we made recommendations for improving consolidation and analysis of the vendor usage by the department so that better volume discounts could be achieved from those type of vendors. I do want to say, when we did the audit, the department had already greatly consolidated and reduced the number of vendors they were using. They had gone on an effort to do that in prior years, and while the numbers showed improvement, there was still some room for consolidation, and we believe getting better prices from the suppliers. Confirming orders was another area we reviewed. These are orders where the requisition documents come in after the fact. So the purchase has been made and the requisition then arrives at GSD. We found in a review of one-time purchase orders about 25% of the documents were classified as confirming orders, which are really supposed to be reserved for emergency situations, and that there was very little documentation in any of those that indicated an actual emergency had occurred. That that was about $5.2 million in expenditures, and what we concluded is about $416,000 in potential excess spending that wouldn't have been the case if it had gone through the normal channels. In terms of blanket purchase orders, and these are the ones described earlier for small items with values of $1,000 or less, we reviewed the records on those and found a number had what appeared to be split orders where same type of item or same vendor was used on the same day for the same dollar amount and appeared to be a way of skirting the $1,000 threshold with multiple purchases. The department indicated that in some cases those were just the same items being purchased in different locations by a department on the same day, but the documentation and review of blanket purchase order purchases by the department was limited at that time. There wasn't a lot of staff dedicated to that effort, so we left it in as a finding and recommendation so that better controls would be installed regarding blanket purchase orders. In another area, for feedback from suppliers and stakeholders, we found limitations in the input the department was getting, both from vendors and from end-user departments. There were a lot of indications that vendors didn't want to bid. The vendors had been solicited and did not submit bids, and we thought that input should be solicited from them to understand what the impediments are or the reasons why they didn't want to do business with the city. SMS, I mentioned earlier, was in the process of being upgraded. What we found at the time we were there is that while the system had a lot of capability, it wasn't being used by all the staff. A lot of the buyers and procurement analysts were not using it as a tool to analyze buying patterns and vendor patterns. The types of things I was talking about earlier were the same vendors being used for multiple contracts or over multiple orders. And that information would give the city better negotiating ability, and we have recommendations for improving the training and use of SMS in our audit. Another area we reviewed was good faith efforts, and this was a hurdle for a number of vendors apparently to either, when a contract is over $100,000, to meet the city requirement for including a minority or woman-owned or small local business enterprise as part of their contract bid. A lot of vendors were not doing that. There was a provision that if they could show a good faith effort, they the requirement was waived. What we found is that a number and majority in our sample of bids were receiving the waiver of the good faith effort requirement, and often without adequate documentation of the efforts that they had gone through to comply. Documentation, we reviewed documentation in a lot of the procurement files and found that that could be improved to ensure that management could review files and walk through step by step to determine if a competitive bid had taken place or if it was an informal bid for smaller dollar amounts, that the documentation was in place to show that a fair process had taken place with as many vendors And finally, in terms of staff ethics training and training in general, we had a finding where we found the department was complying with all city requirements for ethics training, but we believe there should be internal ethics training for the department and oversight by management to ensure that certain vendors weren't being favored by staff, and that all were aware of the restrictions on how they conducted business and solicited bids from different vendors to ensure that nothing improper was happening, given the dollar value of purchases made through the department and the discretion that staff occasionally has in how vendors are selected. So that's the kind of an overview of each of the finding areas, but I could describe them further or respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Well, there's 12 items, GSD. They don't sound real positive.
Actually, it's been a while since we reported on this item, Councilman. I believe it was back in 2009 that we were last requested for information. I believe there were a total of 62 recommendations in this audit, and of those 62, we have implemented 40 recommendations. I can give you just a real brief summary if you'd like. I don't know if you want to take the time to do that.
Not all of them, just
I'll just give you quick highlights. We have updated our procurement manual to cover many of the findings in the audit, including the clarification of the 3-supplier requirement, posting all of our bids on the city's Bavon system, having supervisors review awards regardless of amount, improving our wording of our clauses and implementing new clauses for RFQs for suppliers to disclose that they've already have a contract in place, et cetera. Clarifying our supervisory sign-off of awards and clarifying our supervisor review standards. In addition, the audit pointed out some concerns regarding ethics. Ethics is something that the Department of General Service takes very hard look at. Since that time, we have conducted 2 ethics training seminars for our procurement staff and other GSD personnel that are involved with ordering. One was done by the National Procurement Institute that Ken referenced earlier. The other one was done by the city's own Ethics Commission. We've implemented a reverse auction program, which Ken can certainly give you a whole lot of information on. We, as I alluded to earlier, we've created and distribute a handbook to our blanket and petty cash coordinators. We've revised our monthly scorecard to improve supplier performance data, and at the time of the audit, as indicated, we were going through a system upgrade, which then led to the FMS implementation. We have revamped our basic SMS training class, and we are developing an intermediate and advanced training class. So a lot of work has really gone on to this audit. We do take many of the points serious.
So it says that you've implemented 12 recommendations, 20 partially, full implementation of the others, and how about the remaining 30 that you've not implemented?
Yeah, and that was back in 2009, I believe.
Why was this held so long? Anybody know why this?
I can't address that.
Mr. Clerk?
No, nothing in the file to indicate why. The last report was dated October 7, 2009. There's been no activity on the file since then.
So it just held in committee, no one moved it forward?
No.
I think I took over 5 months ago. Because what I like to do is get these processed through, because the mind fades and the issues wash away, and
Right.
multiple issues, and then no one stays on your tail to keep it moving.
Well, we continue to move with implementing those recommendations that we agreed with, and whether there are a few that we are still in process with, and some that, due to staffing resources, we just have not addressed yet.
Because some of these are pretty serious. I mean, the first ones we discussed, everything was looking positive. Then I look at this one, not maximizing opportunities to reduce cities' commodity procurement, competitive bidding, not leveraging citywide expenditures, frequently used insufficient policies and controls in place for frequently used confirming orders, monitoring deficient, little input, inconsistent, internal ethics problems, ongoing contract evaluation. So there's obviously issues that open it up to, like, you know what happened with building the safety?
Yes.
Okay, we don't want that to happen with you folks.
Agreed, and again, many of those recommendations we have addressed and implemented corrective actions.
So what we want to do then, and I appreciate the audit, obviously, the audits reflect problems. We want to correct those, make it smooth, efficient, and it's incumbent upon the general manager and the supervisors to make sure that the proper procedures are implemented and followed. And if they're not, then the supervisors need to take corrective action and make sure people comply and get on board. When I hear about ethics violations and contractor conflict, you know, that creates an environment like we've had with building safety where the FBI comes in and puts people in jail, which obviously we don't like or need.
Understood.
And it embarrasses us.
And even though we have not been required or requested to report back to this committee, we continue to move forward with the recommendations and implement what we felt was viable and concerned.
So why don't we continue moving forward with the implementation of the modifications to conform with what the audit revealed that are deficiencies, and we can bring this back. And how many days do you think is appropriate? Madam City Attorney, do you want to comment on this one?
I think this is going to take a bit of an accounting.
So 50 days instead of 45.
That would-
How about 65 days? I'm negotiable.
How about 60?
All right, 60? Yeah, because what we want to do is we want to make it smooth, efficient, everybody get on the same page. And if some people don't want to get on the same page, then maybe they got to go find another place to work. Because my tolerance level for people who don't want to do the job, you know, go find something else to do. Because we can't really continue to carry on business as usual. I mean, the dollars aren't there, and the demand keeps on rising, and people's taxes aren't being reduced. You know, people complain about city services, and I say, yes, we're trying. And they say, well, why don't you reduce my taxes so I'll understand? I said, well, we're not going to reduce your taxes. Well, then, you know, you're giving us less service at the same tax rate. So we want to be honorable to the people who are paying the bill. And obviously, we have a huge budget, nearly $7 billion. I know we've got to reduce workforce. And what I tell my staff is, yes, we have a reduced workforce, and that simply means we've got to work harder. Those of us that are fortunate to still have some kind of an income coming in, because it's a tough situation. But the audit obviously reveals some serious issues, and you're dealing with human beings and computers. And the computers, we don't really have a lot of control over, but the human beings we do, and to make sure they comply with the rules, regulations, and procedures. So we'll continue that one and continue on with the recommendations to make it smooth and efficient. And if we have to do some retraining, I know DOT's going through a lot of retraining for the supervisors. They've taken all the supervisors up for retraining. Every single supervisor has gone through retraining of what the responsibilities are. So with your 18 people, you know, we go on the Price is Right, win some money for the city and help it out.
We did do retraining when the new procurement manual was released, so many of the new procedures were reviewed with the staff when that was done.
And do we ever do, I call quality service index. When someone calls into my office, we'll send out an evaluation. Was the service nice? Was the employee cooperative? Did we resolve your issue? Do we ever do that with some of our process?
Actually, we had a section in our office, quality and process section, that it was a budget casualty, I'm sorry to say. Our concerns had to be focused on getting the end users what they needed, warehouses what they needed, and paying the vendors. So unfortunately, this was an area that we had to cut back in. So we were very proactive up until a year and a half ago.
Because building safety used to have an investigative branch, like an internal affairs operation. They disbanded, and guess what? They're bringing it back.
Well, we certainly would like to reinstate that section and get back to doing some of the good things we were doing before.
Yeah, because obviously the taxpayers don't want to hear negative stories.
Sure.
It doesn't benefit anyone. So that'll be the recommendation. We'll bring that back. The city attorney will continue to work on that. We want to thank the controller and the contractor. And it's my goal as the chair of the Audit Government Efficiency Committee to move these forward as quickly as possible, make the recommendations, because I don't see a benefit of them lingering around for a year. I can't give excuses for why it wasn't done prior to my appointment to this committee, but my commitment is we want to keep that calendar fresh. We want to keep these items coming as quickly as possible and give them the time necessary to make sure that changes take place. Obviously, the controller can do 100 audits, and if we don't do anything with changing policy, it doesn't do a service to anyone. So what we want to do is take those audits, move forward, and make the changes. So with that, we will conclude at 3:35. I thank you all.